I went from waiting tables next to the Space Needle to working on policy at the UW Tower, and now I'm running for Seattle City Council to fight for a city that works for all of us, and not just the wealthy few.
Well, those are the words of Alexis Mercedes Rinck. She said she would be working for all of us, and now she really will be, as Councilmember-Elect for Seattle's citywide Position 8 seat on the Seattle City Council. What are her top priorities coming into this job? Plus, what does her election say about what voters think about the current council, and how will her more progressive approach impact the rest of our city leadership, which leans a little more towards moderate or conservative these days? Well, we are discussing these topics and so much more this week on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel, and the views expressed here are mine. My co-host David Croman is on leave, and I am so excited that Councilmember-Elect Alexis Mercedes Rinck has been able to join me for the show. Alexis, thank you so much for being here. Congrats on your win. Are you taking a break after the election or diving into major policy decisions as we speak? What's going on?
I gave myself the long weekend, but now just diving back in. We're swearing in just in a couple of weeks here, so right. Trying to get things stood up very quickly and just getting the ball rolling.
All right. Well, looking forward to hearing more about that. Thank you, Alexis, very much for being here. Thanks also to City Grind Espresso, the background noise sponsor for the audio podcast on the first floor of City Hall. Thanks also to my show patrons. A big shout out to Catherine, who just jumped on as a patron this week. Going to be sending her a very cool-looking Seattle News, Views, and Brews decal. Thank you very much, Catherine. Really appreciate everybody's support of my work at Seattle Channel 2, all you patrons out there. A few budget amendments will be discussed about the channel this week. I'll keep you posted on those. And a reminder, patrons not only get to get this highly sought-after decal, they also get to submit questions to the show that we work on answering. So please do help us out on Patreon, Seattle News, Views, and Brews. A big thanks also to Converge Media. The video version of the podcast airs on Converge Wednesday nights at 7. All right, time to get going with Right Here, Right Now. Councilmember-Elect Rinck, I wanted to talk about this. You had a commanding lead in the primary, which surprised a lot of people back in August, receiving more than 50% of the vote over incumbent Tanya Wu, who was appointed to this position back in January, following Councilmember Teresa Mosqueda's departure to the King County Council. And then the general election came along, and the margin between you and your opponent increased. The latest numbers I'm seeing before certification later on this month, over 58% for you, 41% and change for Tanya Wu. What did it feel like to you to win this campaign? And why do you think so many voters came out to support you?
Gosh, I mean, first and foremost, I feel so humbled that people have put their trust in me to bring their priorities into City Council. I feel proud of the coalition that we've built, including labor partners, the entire Democratic Party, climate, housing, transportation, immigrant rights, gun violence prevention, LGBTQ advocates. I feel gratitude for our amazing team of volunteers and donors who put in the time to show up, knock doors, and talk to our neighbors about our vision. But lastly, I also just feel really focused. This win in so many ways has felt a bit eclipsed by the outcome of the presidential race. And we have a lot of work to do, not just in the areas I campaigned on about affordability and community safety, but now just trying to mitigate whatever attacks may come on our freedoms and the loss of federal funding our region can potentially anticipate. I believe your second question just being, what does this win mean?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. For some people, this was about dissatisfaction with the direction of our largely new city council. For others, people really resonated with my story. I was born to teenagers. I was raised by my grandparents, and my family has had experiences with, with incarceration, with homelessness, with substance use disorder. And I'm here today because of things like the Boys and Girls Club and the library and good schools with teachers who saw me and intervened. That is not an unlikely story. Many folks resonated with it, and for some, they really felt connected to that and felt like I brought important representation also as a renter. And for others, people felt that my relevant and work experiences were really more prevalent and meaningful for this role. They felt like I offered important experience to bring to council, especially to this moment related to human services, public health, and budgeting. Some people wanted to see more of a balanced discussion happening on council. Yeah. Even if they didn't agree with me on every point, they felt like I would bring balance and represent points well, as they felt like there's been more of a slant in one direction on this council. And lastly, but maybe most importantly, people felt like they resonated with and they just liked the policy platform. They felt like it aligned best with their values, which is great that people are checking out the website and reading through what was a really extensive policy platform. Those were all the things I heard from folks at the doors in community. So as much as I'd love to give a succinct answer on, what does this say about where voters are at, I think there was a lot that our campaign offered, and people, across those reasons voted accordingly.
And I'm going to pull apart some of those points in a little bit, but I did want to talk about just the win and the support you gained from so many different Democratic organizations. King County Democrats, 32nd District, 34th, 36th, 43rd. The list really goes on here. I thought this was a smart move on your part because although this is not a partisan election, you knew the Dems in our state were really gearing up for the presidential election and they would turn out in droves. Now, the election, of course, did not go the way that they or many people in our state wanted it to go. Deep breath on that. But it just made for such a strong showing in so many other races, including yours. How big was that surge from Democrats, do you think, for your race?
Huge. And I have to give credit to, of course, the legislative districts. And I want to give credit also to our amazing chair of the state Democratic Party, Shasti Conrad, for having a real organized effort this year across the ticket, from top of the ballot all the way down to the bottom. And of course, this is being a nonpartisan race, but, I've been a member of the 37th LD Democrats, and just seeing how they've been operating over the past year, even leading up to this moment, this consistent messaging of talking about the importance of voting and getting folks, reading and understanding each of the positions. We knew in Washington we were going to have a big ballot this year, and we did. Across all of, not just the presidential, but all these statewide races. We had the ballot initiatives coming out of Let's Go Washington.
Yeah.
And then we had this, 2 municipal things to vote on. There was a lot of voter education needed. And I want to credit, the state Democratic Party, King County Democrats, for really working with their PCO chairs. So shout out to all the PCO chairs. For those who don't know, PCO chairs, so precinct committee officers, the chair, overseeing this team of folks are PCOs who essentially have his designated area, a precinct, so to speak. And each of those individuals, each of those PCOs going out and walking their precinct and talking to their neighbors about everything on the ballot and delivering and talking about, which candidates and positions were being endorsed by your local Democrats. And it's that relational organizing that I think can't be understated. And I had the opportunity to connect with so many PCOs who have stories about their discussions with their neighbors, how they've built that kind of relationship where their neighbor says, well, if you're, you, Barbara, you're voting this way, I trust you. You come by my house every year. I'm always waiting for you to come by and tell me about what's happening. You can't understate how important that is. And I had the opportunity to also walk alongside some PCOs and hear firsthand what their neighbors were saying, like, hey, I trust you. You tell me what I got to know. Thank you for coming by. This is, my first foray into, hearing about some of these candidates. And it always encourages me to, read up more where I'm, based on what you say. That kind of organizing statewide is so amazing. And it really benefited, I think, in this race being, endorsed by each of our legislative districts in the city.
A big shout out to all the Barbaras out there in the world, because I know there's a lot of work going on there. I did want to follow up on the president-elect, and this could have some very possible impacts on city politics. You brought this up earlier. We had one of our show patrons, Blake, write in about this. Thank you very much, Blake, for the question, and here it is. In reference to President-elect Trump's upcoming second term, Mayor Harrell has mentioned that the city has $250,000 set aside for refugee and immigrant legal needs. How are you thinking about preparations for any uncertainty, deportations, loss of federal funds, etc., that may impact Seattleites? What is your approach to working with other council members on this? Thanks again, Blake. Councilmember-elect, what do you think?
This has been so deeply front of mind. And actually, a couple months ago, what is time? A few months ago.
Right. Yeah.
I wrote actually a piece for The Stranger after spending a weekend just diving into Project 2025. It's a long document. It's over 900 pages, but a couple months ago, I spent some time with it just to understand, if this was the plan, what would it mean for municipalities? What would it mean for states? What does it mean for our work? And I wrote a piece for The Stranger kind of evaluating, here are some just offhand, some immediate things that Washingtonians and Seattleites should be mindful of should this actually be the plan of the Trump administration. And that article, I highlighted some things like our potential loss to Medicaid funding. This is highlighted by the fact that Washington is one of, I believe, 9 states that requires private insurance to cover abortion care. This is something that Project 2025 explicitly calls out. These states, they would try to rescind our Medicaid funding for any state that has this kind of law on the books, which Washington does. So anticipating federal dollars that we receive, whether it be through HUD, but also thinking about some of the monies coming from IRA and so on, those we should be anticipating that money might not come through
Housing,
anymore.
homelessness. Yeah, I hear what you're saying there. There's a lot.
Yeah. So thinking through those kind of things, we have a window with the upcoming state legislative session where we should be putting that at the forefront and say, what are we going to do with our state funds to try and be a little bit proactive about loss of federal funding that could be coming down the pipe, but also thinking about, some of the specific groups that could be targeted on the national front. So thinking about our protections that are in place for those who are seeking an abortion within our state. And luckily in previous years, Seattle City Council has taken steps to create legal protected status for those folks. I've already been doing outreach to our LGBTQIA2 spirit partners to say, let's start talking about pulling groups together and getting clear on what the questions are and just creating that convening space to get clear on what the questions are. And also, how do we continue to create protected status here? I'm also mindful of we likely will see new neighbors coming to our region, folks who are seeking political asylum, folks who are fearful for the discrimination that may be happening in their home states. I'm mindful of the fact that I believe it was 2017, Seattle, I think, I can't remember the exact stat, but lots of new folks coming into Seattle area.
Right. The sanctuary city status. And I remember that. Yeah.
Yes. And of course, want to stay at the forefront too, making sure we're maintaining our sanctuary status. Sanctuary city status is tremendously important to me. And I've been doing some work with some of our immigrant and refugee partners, and will hopefully, when swearing into office, also take a moment to be able to pull that community together and talk about how can we ensure protections for folks.
Very much looking forward to hearing more about that. But I also wanted to figure out what else is on the to-do list for Alexis Mercedes Rinck as she joins the council in a matter of weeks. We're going to see what our Councilmember-Elect has to say about that. Coming up on Now Hear This. Councilmember-Elect Alexis Mercedes Rinck is coming into a city council that will have just wrapped up its budget process a few days before she is sworn in. The earliest that could be would be November 26th when the election is certified. But that's not to say she isn't going to have some impact on some policy decisions before the end of the year. From revising policies for renters and landlords to setting wages for app-based delivery drivers, the council still does have some unfinished business on its hands in 2024. I talked with former council member Nick Licata about this last week on the podcast and how the dynamic of the council just might change with Councilmember-Elect Alexis Mercedes Rinck on board.
This is somewhat of a wake-up call, I think, to the current council members, because they will be coming up for re-election, that they need to give more consideration to, quite honestly, the legacy that they were trying to tear apart of the prior city council.
Indeed.
And they need to backpedal and start being more open-minded.
Alexis, let's get to it. How do you think you're going to fit in with a council that leans more moderate, more conservative? How do you plan to do that?
A big part of my professional experience that I bring to this moment is having worked across the political spectrum in a myriad of roles. One of the most notable being with the Sound Cities Association, which I know many people don't know about. It works with a number of suburban jurisdictions across King County. So working across 38 jurisdictions and actually representing every single elected official across 38 cities. As you can imagine,
a lot of different opinions there. You bet.
Opinions. And so I mean it quite literally when I say I've worked with everyone from MAGA to Marxist and have done the work of kind of rallying folks around positions. So often my job would be to have, be in a room with 8 different elected officials, each from a different city, each having their own political ideology, and trying to get them to coalesce around a policy position on a given topic like housing or investments in childcare and so on. And so having, that's a bit of the experience actually I bring into this, and kind of the spirit of really putting the issue on the table when talking to folks to say, can we even find agreement on how we define the problem, and then
rather than the labels of progressive or moderate or whatever else. Is that where you're going with that?
Yeah. Like let's talk about what the issue is at hand, and just even work on problem definition together. Can we agree that we're seeing the problem the same way, and starting from that point rather than immediately jumping in for solutions? That has been a strategy I've used with folks, just to say, again, having folks at the table and saying, let's talk about the problems at hand and see if we can just define this the same way to make sure we're all on the same page. Then comes the piece around, what is the best data and information we have available? What is out there? What have we learned from our recent history? What is up-to-date data saying? And then moving into a conversation around problem solving. And that's been the approach I've used in the past couple of years of my career, and have actually gotten unanimous votes to my name from using that approach, from approving a countywide plan to also having our 5 North King County cities sign into an agreement. That's been an approach I've used, and it's one that can bring down the temperature at times, but also gets folks focused on what's right before them, and also getting clear on where do we agree, where do we disagree, are we even seeing things the same way, or understanding who we are accountable to. So that's kind of the spirit that I bring to, the spirit and approach that I bring to this work, and how I hope to work with my new colleagues. And I'm really excited to be chairing the Sustainability, Arts and Culture and City Light Committee.
Yep, and I wanted to touch on that in just a second, but if I could, I wanted to throw in another question from a patron. Andy wrote this to you. Thank you very much for this, Andy. Congrats on your election victory. Are there any targeted focus areas that you hope to make tangible improvements to during your first 3 to 6 months on council? Some thoughts on this. What do you got for Andy?
Oh my gosh, housing and affordability being first and foremost. And of course, we have the comprehensive plan coming up, and I'm really excited at the opportunity to be having a role in shaping, this fundamental plan that's going to shape how, really dictate where housing is built, how much housing can be built across our entire community. But I'm also mindful.
Putting comprehensive plan and excited in the same sentence. It doesn't always happen. So keep going. Yeah, I hear you.
Y'all elected the nerd. So
okay.
And the comprehensive plan, a plan is only so good as much as we implement and act upon it. And so I'm very clear-eyed on how do we ensure that we have our city departments doing the work to also streamline and make it successful. Yeah. So, when we look at data on SDCI, we know that we've lost
Department of Construction and Inspections. Keep going.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. We know that we've lost a little bit of our housing pipeline when we see the amount of permits coming in. And so thinking about how do we do the work to actually streamline our permitting process across, not just SDCI, but also SDOT, Seattle Department of Transportation, and Seattle Utilities, making sure that internally the city is doing the work to support development, but then also making sure that we are funding affordable housing projects, both through the housing levy, but also using funds from Jumpstart to ensure that we are doing the work to fund affordable housing. Right. So really trying to make headway on making sure that we have a solid development pipeline. Go ahead. Sorry.
I wanted to really quick jump back to that whole idea of chairing the Sustainability Committee. Some plans there? Can you break that down, please?
It's a committee I'm very excited to chair. It is a bit of a hodgepodge committee in some ways. I don't know, in every situation we're pairing sustainability with arts and culture and city light, but right. I think there's a lot of opportunity across these. We are lucky to have a municipally owned utility like City Light. And so looking at, especially with so many electrification efforts underway, there's a lot of opportunity there to be supporting that work. Also mindful of, I want to ensure that our city is living into kind of the promise of trying to be a truly climate friendly, more than climate friendly, but like a jurisdiction that is taking action on climate change. So looking at our sustainability work and really checking in on not only how we're making progress, but I'd love for us to have a clear conversation on how are we also clear and what are our clear steps towards trying to become a carbon neutral city, which our current goal being for 2050, pardon me.
Right.
With arts and culture, I think there is so much ripe opportunity there to be really talking about how are we cultivating this community and important branch within our city to really ensure that we have the kind of a vibrant art scene that I think many people think of when we think of Seattle in the 90s. Yes. And so there's the immediate things that are coming before the committee. I'm already starting to get some briefings, but I am really mindful of the passage of the statewide initiative 2066 around gas usage usage and how
Yep.
this will interact with some legislation that was passed actually in 2023, our building emissions performance standards, which was kind of our measures to try and address emissions from buildings
Right.
and support a transition to electrification. And so the committee that I'm chairing is supposed to be overseeing the rulemaking process for that legislation. Really front of mind is thinking about how does the passage of 2066 now impact that body of work, and how do we need to adjust course?
That's going to be very interesting to see, because I know there's going to be some legal activity around that bill as well. But if I could bring you back to a little bit more about what the council has been doing over the past couple of weeks, well, actually months, when it comes to the budget that they've put together here. Essentially, we're looking at a budget that had a pretty large budget deficit of about $250 million. The council essentially took a lot of money from Jumpstart, the payroll expense tax, to plug up that hole. Some people have said, "Oh, this isn't a great idea because that money was supposed to be going more towards affordable housing, etc." The council has relied on it to go to other purposes since 2021, but I think there are some concerns about this, and also just the fact that this can be a very volatile tax as well, meaning it really depends on some of these larger companies like Amazon doing well. And I just wanted your thoughts about what the council is doing when it comes to revenue, when it comes to the budget. I know that Councilmember Moore is now talking about potentially a capital gains tax just for the city of Seattle. Can you talk about progressive revenue? Because this was a big part of your campaign, too.
Well, it was very excited to see the proposal coming out of Councilmember Moore's office, and I'm glad that it's being put on the table and look forward to future discussions. But I think we should take a moment to celebrate something, which is that the Jumpstart tax is really delivering for the city of Seattle. This is a progressive tax on big businesses that is dedicated for funding affordable housing, equitable development, our green initiatives. Since it's been implemented, it's collected a lot more funding than originally projected, and that surplus has been used to cover deficits, and that is happening this year as well. And I've been very clear that I'd like to make sure that we are maintaining the original spend plan for Jumpstart. And also, as somebody, frankly, who comes from, working in large public budgets, I'd like to make sure that we have a well-structured, sustainable budget that does not rely on constantly dipping into one major fund to kind of backfill where needed. That's the boring wonk in me that wants to make sure that we have, a really sustainable budget that we can reliably depend on, and is structured in a way that sets us up for success and minimizes this volatility. As I understand it, unfortunately, this year, we had to put out an ask to city departments to model out projected cuts.
That's right.
Staff time was used to do that. So again, creating a sustainable budget that doesn't necessitate this these constant conversations about cuts, using staff time to model that. I just think that we should be really being clear on, also thinking towards the future.
Yeah.
When we know our community's priorities are on housing, from getting people inside to making sure everyone's housing is affordable to them and people aren't being displaced. We know our community wants quick responses to crime, but also crime prevention measures, proven gun violence prevention programs, and built environment changes that we've even seen highlighted in auditors' reports that really support people in stabilization. We know our community wants to invest in young people and make sure that they have the support they need, somewhere enriching and safe to be after school. And we know our community wants to actually live up to this promise of being the Emerald City and leading the way in climate change efforts. And none of that is free. So let's have a realistic conversation about the needs of our city in every neighborhood and the investments that will take us where we want to go.
Thank you very much for that. I wanted to jump in because I had another patron write in with another revenue idea. Eric, thank you for the question. You always send in great ones. Here you go. Amazon, Expedia, and others provide tens of thousands of free parking spots to employees driving alone, discouraging carpooling and the use of transit. To fund transit and encourage carpooling, why not require employers to charge employees to park alone, or have those employees pay a fee to Seattle otherwise? Eric, again, comes up with some very interesting questions. Alexis, some thoughts about this. You're going to do some work with the Transportation Committee, too, I know.
Great idea, Eric. And maybe my own personal bias, I'm somebody who doesn't own a car. And so I fully personally wedded myself to our public transit system, which is why I've been so strongly pushing on our transit investments, because I do think it is a way that, one, when we have expansive transit, especially for folks that are commuting into work, if you're in a position where you don't have to own a car, that's a bit of cost savings. That's more money back in your pocket. I think it's an important equity measure. It's also an important climate measure. We know that over 60% of our local emissions come from passenger vehicles. Unfortunate news for everybody who owns a car. It is our emissions from cars that are contributing to the largest pool of our local emissions. And so ways that we can be investing in such a way that is making it so people are making the natural choice to use public transit, which is a greener mode, which can be a more affordable mode of transportation when done right. Those are things we should be gearing towards. And I think creating other incentives or disincentives, carrots and sticks, if you will, to incentivize that behavior is again, a reasonable measure. And so I'm really excited to see how we can invest more in transit and create more ways that we can incentivize folks to get into our amazing buses and light rail system to get to work.
All right. Thank you for that. Thank you very much for the question, Eric. All right. Well, coming up, just when you were sure the elections for the council were over, guess what? They're going to be starting all over again in just a matter of months. So what does that mean for our newly elected citywide council member? We're figuring out some plans for the future on What's Next. Alexis, elections are so exhausting, but I know you've got to run all over again to do this in 2025 if you want that 4-year term. And I just wanted to ask this. Are you going to use a different approach? Because Erica C. Barnett pointed out this to me last week. She, of course, from Publicola. We talked on Seattle Channel. You're going to be reaching out to a different audience, essentially, in 2025. There won't be as big of a turnout because it's not an even year, not a presidential election year. Do you have to change the way you campaign? What's next here?
That is such a great question. I really wonder how things with such a shift on the national front will kind of influence and maybe have folks refocus, maybe our voters who usually vote on even years refocus and look in our neighborhoods. Generally speaking, Democrats won up and down the ballot this past year.
Yeah.
And I'd love to tap into the energy, especially with so much uncertainty on the national front, for us to talk about what's happening here in this community.
It's all politics is national, all politics is local. Like I see where you're going. Yeah.
Yeah. And our team, I think what I can credit a lot of our success in this campaign to was the fact that we tried to be everywhere, doing everything all at once. And we had an amazing team of folks who were willing to go out and talk to our neighbors every day, frankly. And that's what this is about for me. Talking to our neighbors about the things that people care about. People care about housing. People want to be able to raise a family and grow old here and be able to do all of that safely. People want to be able to navigate our beautiful city with ease, ideally on public transit. And I think bringing us to the local level and continuing to engage with our neighbors, I really wonder how much we can actually change the electorate that turns out next year with this message to say, what are we doing here? How Washington generally, I believe according to when we look at national data, we're one of the only states in the country that went a little bit to the left.
That's right. And Utah, I know, had some changes there too. Yeah, keep going.
And there's something there in that to say, we're a little bit different. And so how can we really focus in on, how are we building a community that works for everybody here? And so, my spirit of this, again, it's all about people. Campaigning is just an extensive of what my life looks like throughout, my council term. Being in community, listening to community priorities, and strategizing with our community so we can really address those needs. And so my office will be continuing to do that work of really just making sure we're reaching every corner of the city, but also getting folks focused back in on the local with the hope that maybe we'll see more folks turn out next year.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting to watch, but we do need to wrap up. And I wanted to ask you this. Tell me the best moment of excitement from this past campaign and maybe your biggest facepalm moment, that, oh my gosh, why did I do that moment of the campaign? What do you got? What can you share with it?
Oh my gosh. I gotta say, on election night, there was a solid 45 minutes before we heard about how Pennsylvania was going, where the energy was electric. The room was packed. People were excited. People were feeling hope. It was incredible to see our base there all in one room, from labor to all of our advocates, Democratic Party. Again, it felt all worth it in that moment. And there was just so much hope in that room about, again, aligning behind this vision around a Seattle that works for everyone and not the ultra wealthy few.
I'm looking for that facepalm moment. What do you got? Anything you wish you had back? I don't know.
That is such a great question. Oh my gosh. I'll say this.
Okay.
Every year we have the week without driving for elected officials.
Yes, right.
But I don't own a car, so every week is week without driving for me, and that presents its challenges. It does, and there were a couple times where I was like, I'm going to take the new G line to this meeting. It's going to be great, or I'm going to hop on light rail and head up this way. And we had a a maintenance failure, and
right.
People want you to be on time for things.
True story. Yeah.
Which makes a lot of sense as a candidate, but when you're standing on light rail for 30 minutes and it's not moving and you don't have another option, those were a couple of moments where I really felt the challenges of, being the candidate that doesn't have a car has its challenges, and I sure hope these folks forgive me and respect that I'm a driven person who's wedded to our transit system. But I definitely had those moments on the campaign.
All right. Well, jetpacks for everyone. I think that's part of the campaign going forward here. We'll see how this goes.
Electric jetpacks.
Yes, electric jetpacks. Thank you very much for that. Alexis, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Brian. Thanks for having me.
That's Councilmember-Elect Alexis Mercedes Rinck. Thank you to you. Thanks to everybody listening to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. Thanks again to patrons who support the show. Catherine, thank you so much for jumping on board this past week. If you're not a patron, join us. Find it on Patreon, Seattle News, Views, and Brews. You can hear us on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen. Thanks for watching on Converge Media, too. We'll see you next time. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2024.